The sound of my body hitting that cold marble floor still echoes in my mind. But what happened next? Well, that changed everything. She thought she'd buried her past deep enough that no one would ever find it. She was wrong. Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Her Real Stories. And if you're new here, welcome to our family where real women share their most powerful moments. Today's story will show you that sometimes the universe has a way of serving justice on a silver platter. So grab your coffee, settle in, and please hit that like button if you're ready for a story of revenge so sweet it'll give you chills. You know how they say your wedding day is supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life? Well, my son's wedding day became the day I learned that some people mistake kindness for weakness. And that's a mistake I was about to make sure she'd never forget. I should probably start by telling you about Marcus, my baby boy. Well, he's 32 now, but to me, he'll always be that little kid who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were roses. After his father died, when Marcus was just 12, it was just him and me against the world. We made it work, though. I worked 2 jobs to put him through college, and he grew up to be this amazing man with a heart bigger than Texas. So when he called me 6 months ago, his voice all shaky with excitement, telling me he'd met someone special, my heart just about burst with happiness. "Mom, she's incredible," he said. "She's classy, sophisticated, everything I've ever dreamed of. Her name's Vivian, and Mom, I think she's the one." Now, I've always been the type of mother who trusts her son's judgment. If Marcus loved her, then I was ready to love her too. That's just how it works, right? When your child finds happiness, you find happiness too. The first time I met Vivian was at a fancy restaurant downtown. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I'd worn to Marcus's college graduation, and drove my old Honda into the city. The place was all crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, the kind of place where you worry about using the wrong fork. She walked in like she owned the world. Tall, blonde, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her smile was perfect, her posture was perfect. Everything about her screamed money and class. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, extending her hand like I was supposed to kiss it or something. "I've heard so much about you. Now I'm a pretty good judge of character. Had to be, raising a boy on my own in this world." And something about the way she looked at me, like she was studying me, measuring me up, made my skin crawl. But Marcus was glowing, absolutely glowing, so I pushed that feeling down deep and smiled right back. "Please call me Dorothy," I said. "And congratulations, honey. Marcus tells me you two are getting serious." She laughed, this tinkling sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, he's such a romantic. We're taking things one day at a time, aren't we, darling?" The way she said darling made my teeth ache, but Marcus ate it up. Poor boy was so smitten he couldn't see past that pretty face to the cold calculation behind it. During dinner, I tried to get to know her better. Asked about her family, her background, what she did for work. But every answer felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. She worked at some high-end art gallery, came from old money back east, went to boarding school in Switzerland. It all sounded very impressive, but something felt off. "What about your parents?" I asked. "Will I get to meet them at the wedding?" Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Just for a second, but I caught it. "They're traveling," she said quickly. "They spend most of their time in Europe now. Daddy's health, you know." Marcus squeezed her hand. "They'll fly in for the wedding, won't they, sweetheart?" "Of course," she said, but I noticed she didn't look at him when she said it. The wedding planning started right after that dinner, and let me tell you, it was like nothing I'd ever seen. Vivian had opinions about everything, and those opinions were expensive. The venue had to be the grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, the most exclusive place in town. The flowers had to be white orchids flown in from somewhere I couldn't even pronounce. The cake had to be from some fancy bakery that charged more for one tier than I spent on groceries in a month. Marcus tried to include me in the planning, bless his heart. But every time I made a suggestion, Vivian would smile that cold smile and say something like, "Oh, that's so sweet, Mrs. Henderson, but I think we need something a little more sophisticated for our guests." Our guests. Like I wasn't good enough to have guests at my own son's wedding. I bit my tongue, though. This was Marcus's day, and if this is what made him happy, then I'd figure out how to be happy too. Even when the invitation list somehow managed to include only 5 people from our side, me, my sister Linda, Marcus's best friend from high school, and 2 neighbors who'd known him since he was little. Everyone else was from Vivian's world. Even when she insisted that the rehearsal dinner be held at some country club where I needed Marcus to vouch for me just to get through the door. Even when she forgot to include me in the bridal party photos because my dress clashed with the color scheme. I kept telling myself it was just wedding stress, that once they were married and settled, things would get better. But deep down, in that place where a mother's instincts live, I knew this girl was trouble. The night before the wedding, Marcus came by my little house on Elm Street. He looked handsome in his tux, but tired, like he'd been carrying a heavy weight. "Mom," he said, sitting down at my kitchen table where we'd had so many conversations over the years. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart jumped. "What is it, baby? Do you like her? Really like her?" Oh, how I wanted to tell him the truth. How I wanted to sit him down and explain all the little red flags I'd been seeing, all the ways she made me feel small and unwelcome. But when I looked at his face, saw the hope and love shining there, I couldn't do it. "I like that you love her," I said, and that was the truth. "And I want you to be happy, Marcus. That's all I've ever wanted." He hugged me then, tight and warm like when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. "She's just nervous about fitting in," he said. "Her family is so different from us. But once we're married, once she feels secure, I know you two will be best friends." I held him close and prayed he was right. But that voice in my head, the one that had kept us safe all these years, was screaming warnings I couldn't ignore. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect spring mornings that makes you believe in new beginnings. I put on my best dress, the pale pink one I'd bought special for the occasion, and did my hair the way Marcus liked it, soft curls around my face. The grand ballroom was gorgeous. I'll give Vivian that. White orchids everywhere, candles flickering like tiny stars, and enough crystal to blind a person. The guests were already starting to arrive, and I could tell just by looking at them that I was way out of my league. Designer gowns, jewelry that caught the light like little suns, conversations about vacations to places I'd only seen on TV. I found my seat in the front row, right where the mother of the groom should be, and tried to look like I belonged. Linda sat next to me, squeezing my hand and whispering, "You look beautiful. Marcus is lucky to have you." The ceremony was lovely, even if it felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. Vivian looked stunning in her designer gown, and Marcus looked happier than I'd ever seen him. When they kissed at the altar, I cried real tears of joy, pushing all my worries aside for just a moment. But then came the reception, and with it, the moment that changed everything. The cocktail hour was in full swing, and I was doing my best to make small talk with Vivian's friends and family. They were polite enough, but I could feel them looking at me like I was some kind of curiosity, the simple woman from the wrong side of the tracks who'd somehow produced the groom. I needed a break from all the fake smiles and backhanded compliments, so I stepped outside onto the hotel's garden terrace. The spring air was sweet with the smell of blooming flowers, and for a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. That's when I heard them talking. 2 women in expensive dresses were standing by the fountain, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but sometimes you can't help what you hear. I can't believe she actually went through with it, one of them was saying. After everything that happened back in Millbrook. Sure, the other one hissed. Someone might hear you. Please. Look around. No one here knows anything about Victoria Cross. Victoria Cross. Not Vivian. Victoria. I still can't believe she had the nerve to change her name and reinvent herself like that, the first woman continued. After what she did to that poor old man. My blood went cold. I pressed myself back against the building, staying in the shadows. Well, you have to admit, she's good at what she does, the second woman said with a bitter laugh. She almost had me fooled too, before I figured out who she really was. Does he know? The first woman asked. The husband. Are you kidding? If he knew she was a convicted fraud artist who spent 6 months in county jail, you think he'd have married her? That poor boy has no idea what he's gotten himself into. The words hit me like physical blows. Fraud artist. County jail. My Marcus, my sweet, trusting boy, had married a criminal. The funniest part, the first woman went on, is watching her try to play the part of the refined socialite. Remember when she was just Vicky Cross from the trailer park, getting arrested for running credit card scams on old people. They walked away then, their laughter floating back on the night air. I stood there in the shadows, my mind racing, my hands shaking with anger and fear. Not fear for myself, but fear for my son. My boy who saw the best in everyone, who'd married a woman who'd built their entire relationship on lies. I thought about marching back inside and confronting her right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of Marcus's glowing face at the altar, or maybe it was 32 years of learning to think before I acted. Either way, I decided to wait, to watch, to learn more before I made my move. The dinner service started, and I took my assigned seat at table 3. Not the head table, not even table 1 or 2. Table 3, tucked away in a corner where the mother of the groom could be safely ignored. Vivian, or Victoria, as I now knew her real name to be, made a grand entrance with Marcus, posing for photos and accepting congratulations like she was royalty. Every smile, every gesture, every word out of her mouth was perfectly calculated to maintain her image. But I was watching now with different eyes. I could see the cracks in her mask, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the way she positioned herself to always look better than everyone around her. She was performing, and she'd been performing since the day Marcus met her, during the father-daughter dance. Or, in this case, the mother-son dance, since my ex-husband wasn't in the picture. Marcus pulled me onto the dance floor. "Thank you for everything, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "I love you so much." "I love you too, baby," I whispered back, and meant every word. Which is why what I was planning to do next was going to hurt so much. As the evening wore on, I found myself studying the other guests, trying to figure out who else might know Victoria's secret. The 2 women from the terrace were still there, shooting knowing looks across the room. A few other people seemed to be whispering and pointing, but most of the crowd appeared genuinely fooled by her act. Around 10 o'clock, people started getting up from their tables to mingle and dance. I was sitting alone, sipping my wine and thinking about what I'd overheard, when a young man approached my table. "Excuse me," he said, pulling out his phone. "You're Marcus Henderson's mother, right?" I nodded, wondering what he wanted. "I'm Jake Morrison, from Channel 7 News. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about your new daughter-in-law." My heart started pounding. "What kind of questions?" He glanced around, then leaned in closer. "We've been working on a follow-up story about Victoria Cross, Vivian, about what happened in Millbrook 5 years ago. We heard she got married, changed her name, and we're just trying to verify some facts." This was it. This was the moment I could expose her for what she really was, protect my son from whatever game she was playing. But looking across the room at Marcus, who was beaming with happiness as he introduced his bride to yet another group of well-wishers, I couldn't bring myself to ruin his wedding day. I don't know what you're talking about, I told the reporter. And I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my family alone. He looked disappointed but handed me his card anyway. If you change your mind, Mrs. Henderson, please call me. Your son deserves to know the truth about who he married. After he left, I sat there staring at that business card, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to call him right then and there, to let him do the dirty work of exposing Victoria's lies. But another part of me, the part that had raised Marcus to be kind and forgiving, couldn't stomach the idea of destroying his happiness on what was supposed to be the most important day of his life. I decided to wait, to see if maybe, just maybe, Victoria really had changed. Maybe she'd left her criminal past behind her and was trying to build a new life with my son. Maybe love really could transform people. I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. That was my first mistake. It was nearly midnight when it happened. The dancing was winding down and people were starting to say their goodbyes. I was gathering my purse and wrap, getting ready to head home, when Victoria appeared beside my table. Mrs. Henderson, she said, and something in her voice made me look up sharply. The sweet, fake tone she'd been using all evening was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. I need to speak with you. Of course, dear, I said, though every instinct I had was telling me to be careful. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, but instead of settling into it properly, she positioned it at an odd angle. I wanted to thank you for being so cooperative today. I'm not sure what you mean. Her smile was razor-thin. Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean. That little reporter friend of yours? The one asking questions about my past? I saw you talking to him. My blood went cold. She'd been watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. I said quietly, "Yes, you did. And I want you to know how much I appreciate that." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because it shows me you understand your place in this family." My place. Let me be clear about something, Mrs. Henderson. I am Marcus's wife now. His primary family. His priority. And while I'm sure you've enjoyed being the most important woman in his life for all these years, that time is over. I felt like I'd been slapped. Vivian, I don't think you understand, Dash. Oh, I understand perfectly. She stood up then, still holding onto the back of the chair. You see, I know exactly what kind of woman you are. Small town, small-minded, probably never been anywhere or done anything significant in your entire life. And now you're threatened because your son has found a woman who can give him things you never could. That's not Dash. Class, she continued, talking right over me. Culture. Connections. A future that doesn't involve living paycheck to paycheck in some dingy little house. Each word was like a knife to my heart, not because they hurt me, but because this was who my son had married. This cruel, calculating woman who saw love as a competition to be won. Marcus loves me, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. And I love him. Nothing you say or do will change that. Maybe not, she said with a shrug. But I can certainly make his life difficult if you continue to be a problem. You see, Mrs. Henderson, I know things about influence, about manipulation. I know how to make a man choose between his mother and his wife. And I think we both know who'll win that battle. She was still holding the chair, and I started to get a very bad feeling about what was coming next. So here's what's going to happen, she continued. You're going to be a good little mother-in-law. You're going to smile and nod and stay in your lane. You're going to come when invited and leave when dismissed. And most importantly, you're going to keep your mouth shut about anything you might think you know about my past. I stared at her in amazement. You really think you can just dash? Sit down, she said suddenly, loudly enough that a few nearby guests turned to look. Please, Mrs. Henderson, let me help you to your seat. And that's when she did it. That's when she pulled the chair out from under me just as I was lowering myself down, sending me crashing to the floor in front of everyone. The fall knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I just lay there, stunned and humiliated. My dress had ridden up, my purse had scattered its contents across the marble floor, and I could feel every eye in the room staring at me. "Oh my goodness!" Victoria exclaimed, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Are you all right? Here, let me help you." But she didn't help. She just stood there, looking down at me with satisfaction in her eyes. "Your place is on the floor, you old hag," she said quietly so only I could hear. Then, louder for everyone else, "Someone please help her. I think she's had too much to drink." The laughter started then. Quiet at first, just a few snickers from the back of the room. But it spread, growing louder and meaner, until it felt like the whole ballroom was laughing at the pathetic old woman who couldn't even sit down without falling over. A kind gentleman, I never did learn his name, finally stepped forward to help me up. As he pulled me to my feet, brushing off my dress and gathering my scattered belongings, I caught sight of those two women from the terrace. One of them was staring at Victoria with knowing eyes, but she kept quiet, just whispered urgently to her friend. "Isn't that?" I heard her say, but the rest was lost in the noise of the crowd. The laughter died down, people went back to their conversations, and the evening continued like nothing had happened. But I had heard enough earlier to know there was something worth investigating about Victoria Cross. Victoria helped me to a chair with all the fake concern she could muster, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She knew someone had recognized her. She knew her carefully constructed new life was suddenly vulnerable. She just didn't know how thoroughly I was going to exploit that vulnerability. But this was just the beginning, because Victoria Cross, or whatever she wanted to call herself, had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the quiet strength of a mother protecting her child. And over the next 6 months, I was going to show her exactly what that mistake was going to cost her. See, there's something about being written off as just another harmless old lady that gives you certain advantages. People don't see you coming. They don't think you're capable of the kind of methodical, patient revenge that takes real intelligence to pull off. Victoria was about to learn that some of us old ladies have been playing the long game a lot longer than she'd been alive. The ride home from the wedding was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Linda drove while I sat in the passenger seat, still shaking from the humiliation, still feeling the eyes of all those people on me as I'd struggled to get up off that floor. "I can't believe she did that to you," Linda kept saying. "In front of everyone. At her own wedding. What kind of person does that?" I knew what kind of person. A person who'd spent years perfecting the art of manipulation and control. A person who saw other people as obstacles to be removed or tools to be used. A person who'd fooled my sweet, trusting son into thinking she was someone worth loving. But I also knew something Victoria didn't know about me. I hadn't raised a child on my own, worked my way up from secretary to office manager, and survived 30 years in a man's world by being weak or stupid. I'd learned how to be patient, how to plan, how to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. And Victoria Cross had just given me all the motivation I needed. The next morning I started with research. That business card from the Channel 7 reporter was still in my purse, and I called Jake Morrison first thing. "Mrs. Henderson?" He sounded surprised to hear from me. "I wasn't expecting you to call. I want to know everything," I said. "Everything about Victoria Cross. But I need to know it stays between us for now." "Absolutely. Can we meet somewhere private?" We met at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Marcus might see us. Jake brought a thick file folder and spread the contents across our corner table like he was dealing cards. "Victoria Cross," he began. "Born Victoria Marie Kowalski 31 years ago in Millbrook. Mother was a waitress. Father unknown. Grew up in the Shady Oaks trailer park." Already the picture he was painting was nothing like the old money, background Victoria had fed my son. She started young, barely 20, already running credit card scams and fake ID schemes. But she got more ambitious as she got older. Changed her name to Victoria Cross when she was 22, probably thought it sounded more sophisticated. He pulled out a newspaper clipping from 5 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman arrested in elder fraud scheme." The photo showed Victoria Cross being led away in handcuffs, her hair darker and her face harder than the polished woman who'd married my son. After she got out of county jail, she disappeared for about 2 years. Then she showed up here with a new first name, Vivian instead of Victoria, keeping the Cross surname she'd stolen, and a whole new background story about boarding school and old money. She targeted elderly people, Jake explained. Would befriend them, gain their trust, then convince them to give her access to their bank accounts or credit cards. She told them she was helping them manage their finances, but she was really stealing everything they had. My hands clenched into fists. The thought of her preying on vulnerable old people made me sick. Her biggest victim was a man named Harold Whitman, Jake went on. 73 years old, recently widowed, lonely. She convinced him she was in love with him, got him to add her name to his accounts, then cleaned him out. Took everything, his savings, his late wife's jewelry, even the money he'd set aside for his grandchildren's college funds. I thought about Marcus, about how she'd targeted him with the same calculated charm. My poor boy had no idea he was just another mark in her long game. She went to jail? I asked. County jail, 6 months. She got out early for good behavior, disappeared for a while, then showed up in our city 2 years ago with a new name, a new background story, and a whole new identity. How did she manage that? Jake shrugged. It's not that hard if you know what you're doing. Victoria Cross was legally changed from Victoria Kowalski. She could have told people whatever she wanted about her background. Who's going to fact-check a story about boarding school in Switzerland? I studied the photos he'd brought. Court documents, police reports, interviews with her victims. This woman had destroyed lives, stolen dreams, left elderly people broke and broken. And now she was married to my son, with access to his bank accounts, his trust, his love. What can I do with this information? I asked. Jake raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean legally. Can I show this to Marcus? Can I have her arrested? The marriage is legal, he said. She served her time for the fraud charges, so she can't be prosecuted again for those crimes. As for showing your son, he hesitated. Mrs. Henderson, I have to ask, what are you planning to do? I looked at those photos again, at the cold calculation in Victoria's eyes even as she was being arrested. I thought about my son's trusting face, about the way he defended her when I'd expressed my concerns. I'm going to protect my boy, I said simply. Whatever it takes. But I couldn't just dump this information on Marcus. He was so in love, so convinced that Victoria was his fairy tale princess, that he'd probably think I'd made it all up. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to let Victoria destroy herself. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. I started slowly, carefully. Victoria had made one crucial error in her new identity. She'd stayed in the same region where her crimes had been committed. That meant there were people around who might recognize her, people who remembered Victoria Cross and what she'd done. My first stop was Millbrook, the small town where she'd run her scams. It was only an hour's drive from the city, and I told Marcus I was going to visit an old friend. Which wasn't entirely a lie. I did look up an old friend while I was there. Betty Morrison, no relation to Jake the reporter, had been my roommate in nursing school 40 years ago. She'd married a local police officer and settled in Millbrook, raising 3 kids and working at the hospital there. When I called her, she was delighted to hear from me. Dorothy Henderson, she exclaimed. My goodness, it's been what, 10 years since we've talked? How are you, honey? I'm doing well, Betty. Listen, I was wondering if I could come visit you. There's something I need to ask you about. We met for lunch at a little diner in downtown Millbrook, and after we'd caught up on our families and our health, I pulled out one of the wedding photos Jake had given me, one that showed Victoria clearly. Betty, do you recognize this woman? She studied the photo for a moment. Then her face darkened. Oh, honey, that's Victoria Cross. Or Victoria Kowalski, as we knew her. That girl was nothing but trouble. Why are you asking about her? I told Betty the whole story. The wedding, the humiliation, the research I'd done. By the time I finished, Betty was shaking her head in amazement.
Your poor son, she said.
He has no idea what he's gotten himself into. I need to expose her, I said. But I need to do it in a way that doesn't make Marcus hate me for destroying his marriage. Betty thought for a moment. There might be a way. Victoria had a real talent for making enemies when she lived here. People who'd love nothing more than to see her get what's coming to her. That's how I met Harold Whitman. Harold lived in a small apartment in an assisted living facility on the outskirts of Millbrook. At 78, he was still sharp as a tack, but the financial devastation Victoria had caused had forced him to sell his house and most of his possessions. When I explained who I was and why I was there, his eyes filled with tears. She destroyed my life, he said simply. Took everything my Margaret and I had worked for over 50 years. I had to sell our house, liquidate Margaret's jewelry collection, even cash in a life insurance policy to pay the bills Victoria ran up in my name. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it. But I think there might be a way to get some justice for what she did to you.
How?
I pulled out my phone and showed him photos from the wedding, pictures of Victoria in her designer gown, laughing and posing like she didn't have a care in the world. She's married now, I explained. Married to a good man who has no idea about her past. She's living the high life on his money, probably planning to do to him what she did to you. Harold's face went hard. That poor boy. I want to stop her, I said. But I need help. I need people who knew her who can testify to what kind of person she really is. What did you have in mind? Over the next hour, I laid out my plan. It was risky, it was complicated, and it was going to take months to execute properly. But Harold was in, and through him, I connected with 2 other victims of Victoria's scams, an elderly woman named Agnes Porter and a retired teacher named Robert Williams. All of them wanted to see Victoria face consequences for what she'd done. All of them were willing to help me make that happen. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. Victoria had built her new life on lies, creating a fantasy version of herself that my son had fallen in love with. But lies have a way of unraveling when you pull the right threads. And I was about to start pulling. Phase 1 was research and documentation. Jake Morrison helped me gather every piece of evidence about Victoria's real past, court records, police reports, photos, witness statements. I wanted to be absolutely certain of my facts before I made any moves. Phase 2 was reconnaissance. I needed to understand Victoria's new life, her routines, her weaknesses. I started showing up at places where she went, the art gallery where she worked, the country club where she played tennis, the upscale boutiques where she shopped. I was just another anonymous older woman in the background, invisible and unthreatening. But I was watching everything. I was learning her patterns, her habits, her vulnerabilities. Victoria had a routine. Every Tuesday, she had lunch with her boss at the gallery, a pretentious man named Charles Worthington who clearly had a crush on her. Every Thursday, she played tennis at the country club with 3 other wives from Marcus's social circle. Every Saturday, she went shopping on Fifth Street, hitting all the designer stores. She was building relationships, I realized, creating a network of people who could vouch for her character, who would defend her if anyone started asking uncomfortable questions. It was smart, but it was also a weakness, because all of those relationships were built on the same lies she'd told Marcus. Phase 3 was where things got interesting. I started reaching out to people from Victoria's past, Not just her victims, but former neighbors, co-workers, anyone who'd known Victoria Kowalski before she became Victoria Cross, and then reinvented herself as Vivian Cross. Most of them were happy to talk once they learned what she was up to. Victoria hadn't made many friends in Millbrook. She'd been the kind of person who burned bridges and made enemies, leaving a trail of resentment in her wake. She always thought she was better than everyone else, said Carol Jenkins, who'd lived in the trailer next to Victoria's family. Even when she was just trailer trash like the rest of us, she acted like she was destined for something better. I guess she found a way to make that happen. She used to brag about how easy it was to manipulate men, added Susan Walsh, who'd worked with Victoria at a local restaurant. Said all you had to do was figure out what they wanted to hear, and then tell them exactly that. She practiced on customers, learning how to read people and give them what they wanted. Every conversation gave me more insight into how Victoria operated, how she'd managed to fool my sons so completely. She was a chameleon, changing herself to match whatever her target needed her to be. Marcus had wanted a classy, sophisticated woman who could elevate his social status, so that's exactly what she'd given him. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd stayed too close to her old hunting grounds, and she'd underestimated the long memory of the people she'd wronged. Phase 4 was where I started to get creative. I began attending the same social events Victoria did, always staying in the background but making sure I was visible. I'd smile and nod when introduced, play the part of the harmless mother-in-law who was trying to fit into her son's new world. But I was also planting seeds. Tiny comments, innocent questions, subtle hints that made people start to wonder about Victoria's background. Oh, Vivian went to boarding school in Switzerland? I'd say to one of her tennis partners. How interesting. I could have sworn Marcus mentioned she grew up somewhere in the Midwest. But then, I'm getting old. Maybe I misunderstood. That's such a beautiful accent Vivian has, I'd tell her boss at a gallery opening. So refined. Though sometimes I catch little hints of something else underneath. Regional, maybe? I have such an ear for dialects. I never said anything directly accusatory. I just asked questions, made observations, created tiny cracks in the perfect image Victoria had constructed. And slowly, people started to notice the inconsistencies in her stories. The beauty of this approach was that Victoria couldn't complain about it without seeming paranoid. What was she going to do? Accuse me of being too interested in her background? That would only make people more curious. But I could tell it was getting to her. At Marcus's birthday dinner in March, she kept shooting me suspicious looks across the table. When I complimented her dress and asked if it was from a local designer, she snapped at me in front of everyone. "Why are you so interested in where I shop, Dorothy?" she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The table went quiet. Marcus looked embarrassed, and Victoria's mask slipped just enough for everyone to see the ugly truth underneath. "I was just making conversation," I said mildly. "I thought maybe you could recommend some places for me to look. But if it's a secret..." "It's not a secret," she said quickly, forcing her smile back into place. I shop all over. Different places." After that dinner, Marcus called me the next day. "Mom, what's going on between you and Vivian?" he asked. "She seems really stressed whenever you're around." "I don't know what you mean, honey," I said. "I've been nothing but nice to her." I know. It's just, she thinks you're trying to dig up information about her past or something. She's worried you don't approve of her."
Perfect.
The paranoia was setting in. "Marcus, baby, your happiness is all that matters to me," I said. "If Vivian makes you happy, then I'm happy for you both. But if she's feeling insecure about something, maybe you should ask yourself why." That planted the seed I wanted to plant. Marcus started paying more attention to Victoria's reactions, started noticing the inconsistencies I'd been subtly highlighting. He didn't say anything to me about it, but I could tell he was beginning to have doubts. Phase 5 was where I started to get more aggressive. I reached out to Harold Whitman, and asked him to do something that took a lot of courage. "I want you to write a letter," I told him during one of our phone calls. A letter to the editor of the city newspaper. About elder fraud, about how it affects victims, about the need for people to be more aware of the warning signs. "And mention Victoria? Not by name, but describe your experience. Let people connect the dots themselves." Harold's letter was published on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, it was being shared all over social media. The story was heartbreaking. An elderly widower, lonely and trusting, manipulated by a young woman who pretended to love him while stealing his life savings. I made sure to share the article on my own Facebook page with a comment about how terrible it was that people could be so cruel to the elderly. Victoria saw it, of course. She saw everything I posted, probably looking for reasons to complain to Marcus about me. But she couldn't say anything about it without drawing attention to the very story she wanted people to forget. That weekend, at her tennis club, I overheard two of her friends discussing the article. Can you imagine? One of them was saying, "A woman who could prey on elderly people like that. It's disgusting." "I know," the other replied. The article didn't name her, but I hope they caught whoever did it. Victoria's face went pale when she realized they were talking about her crime, even though they didn't know it yet. She excused herself and didn't come back to finish the match. Phase 6 was where everything started to accelerate. I began reaching out to Victoria's new friends and colleagues, not to accuse her of anything, but to share Harold's story and others like it. I presented myself as a concerned citizen who was passionate about protecting the elderly from fraud. It's such an important issue, I'd tell Victoria's boss at the gallery. These criminals are so good at reinventing themselves, at creating new identities and finding new victims. Sometimes they're right under our noses, and we don't even know it. "Have you ever encountered anything like that?" he'd ask. "Oh, I've heard stories," I'd say vaguely. "People who seem so charming and sophisticated on the surface, but have these dark secrets in their past. It makes you wonder how well we really know the people around us." The seeds of doubt I'd been planting were starting to sprout. People began looking at Victoria with new eyes, noticing things they'd overlooked before. The way she deflected questions about her past, the inconsistencies in her stories, the slight accent that sometimes slipped through her polished facade. And Victoria was starting to crack under the pressure. It came to a head in April, just 2 months after the wedding. Marcus called me one evening, his voice strained and confused. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said. "Can I come over?" When he arrived at my house, he looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual easy smile was nowhere to be found. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked, guiding him to the kitchen table where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. "It's Vivian," he said, running his hands through his hair. "She's been acting so strange lately. Paranoid, defensive, like she's hiding something." I poured him a cup of coffee and waited for him to continue. "She keeps accusing me of checking up on her, of not trusting her. But, Mom, I found something." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of what looked like a driver's license. But the name on it wasn't Vivian Cross. It was Victoria Kowalski. "I found this in her jewelry box," he said, "hidden underneath the lining." Mom, who is Victoria Kowalski. When I asked her about it, she completely lost it. Started screaming at me about how I was spying on her, how I didn't trust her. She said it was just old paperwork from before she changed her name legally, but why hide it from me? Then she locked herself in the bedroom and wouldn't come out. My chest tightened. This was it, the moment I'd been working toward for months. "Marcus," I said gently, "what does your gut tell you?" "That she's been lying to me about everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That maybe I don't know my own wife at all." I reached across the table and took his hands in mine. "Then maybe it's time to find out who she really is." But even as I said it, I could see the resistance in his eyes. He loved her. Despite everything, despite the doubts and the strange behavior and the hidden identity, he still loved the woman he'd married. "What if I'm wrong?" he asked. "What if there's an innocent explanation and I'm just being paranoid because of everything you've been saying?" "Then we'll find that out too," I said. "But Marcus, if someone you love is hiding their real name from you, don't you deserve to know why?" It took another 3 weeks before Marcus was ready to learn the truth. 3 endless weeks of watching my son swing like a pendulum, defending Victoria one day, questioning her the next. Sometimes he'd call me late at night, his voice raw, saying, "Mom, I think I'm losing her. I think she's hiding something." And then the very next morning he'd show up at my house with roses for her, swearing she was simply stressed. I let him do it. I let him wear himself out on his own denials, because I knew the day would come when he could no longer carry the weight of her lies. And when that day came, I would be ready. Jake Morrison, the reporter who had helped me gather everything, was more than happy to share his file again, but this time not just with me. This time, Marcus sat across from him at that same coffee shop where I'd first seen Victoria's life exposed on paper. The smell of burnt espresso and disinfectant floor cleaner clung to the air. My son sat hunched forward, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white, his wedding band cutting into his skin. Jake spread the folder across the table, like a dealer laying out a bad hand of cards. "Your mother asked me to investigate your wife," he began. His voice was steady, professional. "What I found, well, it's not good." Marcus swallowed hard. "Are you absolutely sure this is about Vivian?" "Vivian Cross," Jake said, tapping the mugshot with a finger. "Previously Victoria Cross. Born Victoria Kowalski. Same woman, different names." The photo seemed to drain the color from my son's face. He leaned closer, studying the sharp cheekbones, the hard set of the jaw, the unflinching stare of the younger woman in the picture. The bones were the same as the bride who had smiled at him just months earlier. "This can't be right," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. His voice cracked. "This has to be someone else. Vivian isn't capable of this." "I'm sorry," Jake said gently, "but it's all documented. Court records, police reports, victim statements. Victoria Kowalski, Victoria Cross, and Vivian Cross are all the same person." For the next hour, Jake laid it all out like an autopsy of my son's marriage. The trailer park childhood, the name change, the fraud charges, the elderly people stripped of their savings, the 6 months in county jail. With each revelation, I watched Marcus crumble a little more, like a tower of blocks with pieces being pulled out one by one. Finally, he stared at the mugshot again and whispered, "She lied to me. About everything. Her family, her background, her past. Our entire relationship is built on lies." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "I'm so sorry, baby." For the first time since all this began, he didn't pull away. He just sat there, staring at the evidence, his whole world collapsing in front of him. "What should I do?" he asked finally, his voice small, like he was 12 years old again. "That's up to you," I said softly. "But whatever you decide, I'll be here for you." The confrontation came 3 days later. Victoria, or rather, the real Victoria Kowalski, showed up at my house unannounced. She didn't bother with her polished mask. No pearls, no designer coat. Just fury. Pure, unfiltered rage. She shoved past me into my living room, slamming the door behind her. "You bitch," she spat, her eyes wild. "You vindictive old bitch. You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" I closed the door with deliberate calm. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play innocent with me," she shrieked. "I know what you've been doing. Following me around, asking questions, digging up my past. You've been planning this since the wedding." I held her stare. Since you humiliated me in front of everyone and told me my place was on the floor? Yes, Victoria. I've been planning this since then. Her eyes went wide. She hadn't expected me to admit it. Marcus loves me, she said, but her voice trembled. He'll forgive me.
People make mistakes.
I've changed. Have you? I asked, my voice sharp. Because from where I'm standing, you're still the same person. Still lying. Still manipulating. Still using people until there's nothing left. You don't know anything about me. Oh, I know enough, I said coldly. I know you targeted my son the same way you targeted Harold Whitman. I know you saw a lonely, trusting man and decided he'd make the perfect mark. You studied him, figured out exactly what kind of woman he wanted, and then you became that woman. That's not true, she snapped, but her voice cracked. And I know you were already planning your exit strategy, I pressed. Stay married a year or two, get your hands on his accounts, then disappear with everything you could steal. Her silence was my answer. The only thing I don't understand, I said, tilting my head, is why you thought you could get away with it. Did you really think no one would recognize you? Did you really think your past would stay buried forever? She faltered. I was different then. Young. Stupid.
Desperate.
I'm not that person anymore. I laughed without humor. Aren't you? Because the woman who pulled that chair out from under me, who told me my place was on the floor, who threatened to turn my son against me, she sounds exactly like the one who preyed on old people for money. Her face twisted, mascara smearing down her cheeks. You have no idea what it's like to grow up with nothing. To watch other people live the life you wanted while you were stuck in a trailer park with a drunk mother and no future. I did what I had to do to survive. And what about Harold Whitman's survival? I shot back. What about his right to keep the money he and his wife worked 50 years to save? What about his grandchildren's college fund? That's different, she whispered, but even she didn't believe it.
No.
It's the same. You saw what you wanted and you took it. And you would have done the same thing to Marcus. I love Marcus, she choked. You love what he represents, I corrected. The money, the status, the respectability. But love, real love, you don't even know what that is. She broke then. The polished bride was gone. The mask cracked, and what was left was a sobbing girl with streaked makeup and shaking hands.
Please, she begged.
Please don't take him from me. He's all I have. For one flicker of a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered Harold Whitman in his cramped apartment. Agnes Porter, broken and betrayed. And my son, the boy who once brought me dandelions and called them roses, now tricked into loving a fraud. You took him from yourself, I said coldly, the moment you built your life on lies. She stumbled out of my house, defeated, but I knew she wasn't finished. Desperate people never are. The call came at 2 a.m. Marcus's voice was tight, controlled, but beneath it was pure panic.
Mom.
She's gone crazy. You need to know what she's planning. I sat up in bed, every nerve on fire. What happened? I confronted her with everything. All the evidence. Instead of explaining, she screamed that it was all your fault. Then she locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of sleeping pills. My blood went cold. Marcus, call 911 right now. I already did. But Mom, before the paramedics came, she was shouting through the door. Said she was going to make sure everyone knew you drove her to it. Said she'd destroy you the way you destroyed her. I drove through empty streets with my heart pounding, not from worry, but from fury. Even in this moment, even with her life supposedly on the line, she was still manipulating. At the hospital, Marcus paced the waiting room like a caged lion. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. They pumped her stomach, he said when he saw me. The doctor said she didn't take enough to do real damage. More of a cry for help than an attempt. That was all I needed to hear. Did she leave a note? I asked. Marcus's jaw clenched. Oh, she left one. Want to hear it? He pulled out his phone and read, I can't live with the shame of my past being exposed. Dorothy Henderson has destroyed my life out of jealousy and spite. If anything happens to me, she is responsible. I hope she can live with what she's done to an innocent woman who only wanted to love her son. Innocent woman, I repeated flatly. Marcus shook his head. Even now, she can't own it. It's still everyone else's fault, never hers. And in that moment, I knew he finally saw her for what she truly was. The next morning, I went to see her. She was pale in the hospital bed, tubes in her arms, but the moment she saw me, her eyes sharpened. I hope you're satisfied, she said weakly, gesturing at the four. Look what your vendetta has driven me to.
You sat beside her.
Cut the act, Victoria. We both know this wasn't real. Her mask slipped, then snapped back. I was desperate. You destroyed everything I built.
No.
You destroyed it when you built it on lies. She laughed bitterly. You're just a jealous old woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy with someone better than you. Better than me? I leaned in. You're a con artist who preys on the vulnerable. You manipulated my son. You humiliated me. And you think that makes you better? For once, she had no comeback. Just silence. Marcus still loves me, she whispered finally. He'll forgive me. Men always do. Actually, I said, pulling a manila envelope from my purse, Marcus asked me to give you this. Congratulations, Victoria. This is the first honest thing he's signed since marrying you. I placed the divorce papers on her table. She stared at them as if they were a loaded gun. He wouldn't, she whispered. He did. Her face twisted with venom. This isn't over, you old witch. I'll make you pay. I turned at the door. Victoria, you already tried.
But you forgot something.
Some of us old ladies have been fighting battles longer than you've been alive. And we don't lose. She was released 2 days later. By the end of the week, she vanished into the night, leaving behind only a letter, part apology, part blame. Marcus read it, shook his head, and tossed it aside. Even now, he said, she can't take responsibility. A month later, he filed for divorce. We sat in my kitchen one evening, coffee between us, the air heavy but healing. I learned something about myself, he said quietly. I was so eager for someone perfect that I ignored every sign that she wasn't real. You loved her, I said. Or who you thought she was. I loved the fantasy, he corrected. The idea of someone polished, sophisticated. I was flattered that she chose me. I didn't ask the hard questions. Now you know, I said softly. Real love isn't about facades. It's about seeing someone clearly, flaws and all, and choosing them anyway. He smiled, weary but real. Like the way you love me? Exactly like that. 6 months after the divorce, Marcus introduced me to Sarah, a kindergarten teacher.
Warm.
Genuine.
Real.
At their engagement party, Sarah pulled me aside. Marcus told me everything, she said. What you did for him was brave. I just did what any mother would do. No, she shook her head. Not every mother would have had your patience. You waited until he was ready to see it for himself. That took wisdom. Standing there in my garden, watching my son laugh freely for the first time in over a year, I felt peace. The war was over. My family was safe. But this story isn't just about Marcus finding love again, or Victoria getting what she deserved. It's about what I discovered about myself. That being underestimated is power. That sometimes the quiet old lady in the corner is the most dangerous person in the room. That protecting family sometimes means fighting battles they don't even know they're in. Victoria told me my place was on the floor. Instead, I made her world collapse from the ground up. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. But remember this, beautiful souls, protecting your family isn't just about love. Sometimes it's about having the strength to stand up to people who try to tear you down. Sometimes it's about proving that no matter how old they think you are, no matter how harmless they assume you to be, you still have fight left in you. Thank you for watching Her Real Stories. If this story of courage and justice touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of strength, second chances, and standing tall when life tries to knock you down. What would you have done in Dorothy's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's support each other in this amazing community we've built together. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and you are stronger than anyone who tries to make you feel small.